So Socrative.com.
Got the login.
Room name. So when you get to student login, it'll ask you for a room name. Stick myth. Write myth in there. So just write in MYTH. Hit join. Student login. Go ahead and, if you need tech support, feel free to ask. We've got a couple minutes for this little exercise. Pre-class quiz.
It says name, and then it says please tell me your name.
So the room name is this one, and then, yes, I might have asked you your name twice.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was
Oh, it's not. Do we answer all of this?
Please do. Yeah, it'll take a minute or two. It's totally fine.
The link initial is Socratic.com.
Socrative, here, let me write that up. Yeah, so it's like shown here at the top, Socrative.com. Student login, and then it'll ask you the room name. The room name is myth. And then you go from there. This has absolutely nothing to do with the A, content mastery, the top 10%, except it does. So you're answering some random questions right now, but at least they might seem random at the time.
Only letters and numbers and letters.
Oh, that's odd. I've never experienced that one before.
Only letters and numbers are allowed.
You only typed in
You might
letters
have
and
a
numbers.
space in there.
Yeah.
So when you're finished, you can take a look at the first page. This is the syllabus for our course. The first page back and front. Our little workshop here today, I created the syllabus. The front page is boilerplate. I'd rather you focus on the back page. The goal for today. Yeah. Pardon? Oh, absolutely.
2 more.
All right.
Have you used poll anywhere as well, or everywhere?
Pull everywhere. There's a similar process. And so what I'm doing right now, for those of you that haven't used Socrative before, it's free. And I'm watching your results show up here. So this I do at the start of class to get a sense of where people are at in terms of content knowledge, understanding. If they watch the video I assigned for them to watch before class, I'll throw in a quiz question about that. So what you're doing right now is relevant to what we're going to talk about and the myth of the content mastery of the top 10%. I'm Joe Ross, and it made more sense before G.I. Joe's went out of business. No one knows what G.I. Joe's is anywhere, I don't think. But I'm Joe Ross, and I'm an assistant professor of biology at Fresno State. And I do a lot of things, I wear a lot of hats, and at the end I'll give you a little cheat sheet with contact information resources, including the digital versions of all of this. So if you want to take one of those with my contact information at the end, that's totally fine. So you're taking a look at the syllabus right now, and what does the back page, so the first page of this handout, the back side of that page has a beautiful bell curve with colors. One of the things, so how does this make you feel as the student? So I gave an introduction to the class. Sorry, only 10% of you are going to take away, complete mastery of the content for today. So how does that plus the letter grading and bell curving make you feel as a student? So,
Not good.
not good, so,
Not good, not optimistic.
okay, not optimistic.
We should ask the students.
Absolutely. When you, not just this one, but in any class. What's,
It doesn't depend on me, it depends on what peers, right?
okay, so that's an issue with curving, absolutely.
Not fair.
In what way?
Not fair in that, why would I be competing against him for a grade when he's not me?
Fair enough. And this might be, and I think we're probably all aware as students and as educators, we're probably all aware that curving in particular, I don't curve any of my classes. I wonder, does anybody in here curve in their class? A couple, that's totally fine. No judging here, we're all friends. But it can, if done incorrectly, pit students against each other. Like, I don't want to help you because if I help you, then you're going to ruin the curve, sort of thing. Okay, so what we're getting at then is letter grading is one of many student evaluation dogmas, at least in the US. And I'm going to argue for the purposes of this that A stands for arbitrary. I don't know what A is supposed to stand for, but there's a big issue with letter grading. That there's inter-rater disagreement. What an A means in one class is not necessarily the same as what an A means in the same class with the different instructors teaching a different section. It doesn't, an A in one biology department, in my case, in genetics, which is what I teach, is not necessarily what an A student in genetics in another university would represent. So that's one of the problems I'm arguing about, the arbitrary nature of letter grading. So what I'm going to propose by the end of this is what we can do to maybe solve that problem, a potentially disruptive change. And we started talking about this yesterday at the end of the keynote when our presenter suggested that we get rid of letter grades, which I'm all for, but there are some difficulties and hurdles we have to overcome first, like the entire country's dependence on letter grades and GPAs, and right, so we can take small steps. You have this in your handout. It also has a key at the bottom, fortunately. But I want to note that I got all of the data on this. This is basically the history of letter grading in the United States. Letter grading is not a natural thing. It came from somewhere, right? And why do we have 5 letter grades? And why don't we have an E? Why? These are sort of trivial questions. But I was curious, right? So Durham, who I cite down here in the bottom right, an article in Educational Research, did the legwork. He did the sort of meta-analysis, or the pseudo-analysis of looking at past data and other studies, and pulled together this graphic that I produced from his data. And the way this works is, in 1785, Yale was the first known school in the United States to start some sort of categorical organization of student success, student learning, supposedly. And so they divided into 4 different groups: the optimi, the second optimi, the superiores, and the pejores, which you don't want to be in. And for every one of these columns that's got a colored gradient, the gradient indicates that I wasn't sure exactly on a percentile scale where the cutoffs were. So those cutoffs that I've drawn as little white lines are sort of arbitrary, if it's a gradient column. So all we know is there were 4 different levels. They weren't necessarily aligned to a percentile scale. So the first time we see percentile scales showing up is in 1877. That's, sorry, is that Harvard?
Harvard.
Yeah. And they didn't tell me, or at least Durham didn't find out what the 6 different groups of students were called. So there's no A, B, C, D, F, or pass, conditional, absent. So apparently if you didn't show up at University of Michigan in 1850 to 1860, they decided that was sort of failing. You weren't there, so obviously you didn't pass. And so we see the first strict alignment of letter grades to a percentile scale in 1877. Then a few years later, they went to, instead of 6 divisions, 5 divisions. Now we're starting to see maybe that A, B, C, D, F. But again, it wasn't clear what percentiles those were aligned to. We don't see percentile alignments of letter grades until about 1897. Nothing really changed between then and now, other than the E went away and the F showed up. There have only been a couple really recent innovations in letter grading, if you can call something as mundane as letter grading innovative. The Mount Olive School District in New Jersey did away with D's and F's. They just said it's A, B, C, D, or you didn't pass. Okay. That was an interesting change. Brown, I think that's Brown, has A, B, C, no pass, or you can take credit, you can take as satisfactory, no pass. So pass, no pass, essentially. But Brown is weird, and you need to know this if you evaluate student recommendations or transcripts from Brown. They have a whole page on their website about how to read transcripts from Brown, because they don't report if you fail or don't pass a class. So only classes that you succeed in, pass, get an A, B, C, or credit for, show up on your transcript. That'd be kind of nice. So what I'm proposing today is a little bit more complicated, not too much more. We have 5 letter grades, sure, A, B, C, D, F, I'm fine with that. But instead of doing the traditional 90%, 80%, 70%, 60%, 50% thresholds for who earns those grades, let's do something that's a little bit better for the students and just make that whole percentile scale that we have to discriminate students, let's blow up the letter grades so that they evenly fill that scale. So that we're not compressing our ability to discriminate who's A, B, and C students into that little tiny upper section of test material, or however you're scoring your students. So, in other words, when I started in 2012 as an assistant professor, I knew when I wrote an exam that my exam was going to be 50% surefire you're going to get the points, because everyone's needs to get that 50% to get up to just below failing. From there, then the rest of the 50% of the points on the test are the ones that discriminate who's an F, a D, a C, a B, and an A. So why not just blow up that little section into the whole percentile range? So if you get 0 to 20% of points on my exams, you fail. If you get 20 to 40% of the points, you get a D, and so it's a pretty straightforward innovation. I'd be surprised if some of you haven't thought about this or tried this already. I talked to my dad about this a lot. He's a community college biology professor since 1967, and he said he's tried varieties of this before, and I only run into resistance because some people just don't think it's right to have 0 to 20% of be just Fs. People say, well, how can that work? Well, that's where we get to the, again, hard to read last time, I think we see the red and the black. A, right, the myth of content mastery of the top 10%. Just because you got the top 10% of the points, or you're one of the top 10% of the students in the class, does that mean that you earned an A? Does that mean that you're a master of the content? It depends on how the instructor has assigned the point values on whatever you're using to assess the students. It's totally artificial, right? It depends on how each of us sets up our classes. I was looking for motivational quotes and I found 2. They sound the same, they're from 2 different people. A rear admiral, the most dangerous phrase in the language. We've always done it this way. So here comes the disruption, right? I already gave it away. And the 6 most expensive words in business from a former IBM executive, Catherine DeVry. We've always done it that way. So just because we've always letter graded in 90, 80, 70, 60, A, B, C, D, F does not mean that's how we should necessarily continue letter grading. So, if you're with me, that's great, but you have to be willing to leave your comfort zone, because we're going to do something that's a little bit different. So, here's my philosophy, and I hope you're on board with me. If not, that's totally fine. But my goals are, I want students to be able to understand what they have to do to earn letter grades. How many of you give your students letter grade rubrics on your syllabus? You explicitly explain this is what you have to do to earn an A, and a B, and a C, and a D. So few hands, yeah, excellent. I think that's really valuable because then students have a target for what to aim for in terms of what they need to do to earn different letter grades. I don't see this on a lot of syllabi. I see what you see on that front page syllabus when you turn to the back page, which is that this is how many % of the points. That's not what I'm talking about. Just knowing how many points you have to earn, that doesn't explain what you have to do to earn an A. That just says that means how many points you have to earn to get an A. my colleagues maybe disagree, but I want all of my students to be able to earn an A. I love it. I don't expect the bell curve. That front syllabus, rip it off, tear it out, get rid of it. Right? That's not the syllabus we're going to wind up with at the end of this little chat. I'd love to see all of my students earn an A. And this, for me, is the key. I want to be able to clearly define what students have to do to earn that A. The explained and documented will make sense in a little bit, if it doesn't already. So back to the issue of inter-rater reliability, how different people measure knowledge, say. So let's talk about your marbles. Right? Don't lose all your marbles, slang for intelligence or knowledge or wisdom or something. And so kind of measure students in terms of jars full of marbles, and we can try to assess, have you lost, how many of your marbles have you retained? Do you have a lot of knowledge? Do you have a little knowledge? It turns out that the USDA is way ahead of us in terms of the grading rubrics. So you can go online and find out exactly how much marbling of fat has to be in the different types of steaks to earn different letter grades, essentially. Right? So this could just as easily be letter grades. And so this is how we could be assessing our students' marbling, the content of the whatever fat content in the brain. You have this amount of marbling, you get an A, there's a C, there's an F. So my goal here, really, at the sort of crux of this whole thing, is developing a letter grade rubric that I can share with my students in the syllabus. So here's really what I'm looking for. Oh, the red font's going to kill me. Letter grade rubric aligned with Bloom's taxonomy. And I'll explain to you why I think this is a good innovation. And then we're also going to be talking about backward course design, which we've already heard a little bit about. You may have heard about it in the past, but that is the process of starting with what you want your students to know first, what you want them to be able to do on assessments, and then plan in-class materials accordingly. So that's an outline for the rest of our few minutes together. So first we're going to talk about letter grading rubrics and Bloom's taxonomy, and then we'll move on towards backwards design and how that all fits. So the ultimate goal here, if you don't take anything else away, this is it, I think, is creating whatever sort of assessment it is where you've got an equal distribution of points for all of Bloom's taxonomy levels. Describe Bloom's taxonomy in a minute if you're not familiar. And then you give students in advance information about what those tasks that are aligned to Bloom's taxonomy are going to be. And that takes the form of a student knowledge survey. Thank you. So here's Bloom's taxonomy. This may look familiar. It's just a simple taxonomy that relates different levels of student understanding, essentially. So all you can do is remember, that's the base level of Bloom's taxonomy. True, false, multiple choice, factual, recall. That's low level Bloom's taxonomy. And then the difficulty or importance ramps up to when you're a true master of the content, you can do something like create, produce original work. And I think that Bloom's taxonomy is useful for aligning with letter grading because a lot of people understand this, know about it, and it's easy to apply. I think a lot of us may, I know some of my colleagues do, agree that if all you can do is recall facts, maybe you're not passing the class, or maybe you're just barely passing. But if you can do something that's high up on Bloom's taxonomy, that shows advanced understanding and knowledge of the topic. So in my class, I teach an upper division class that's required for biology majors, and I've got about 75 students in my class. And I give traditional midterms and finals, written, multiple choice, true, false, fill in the blank. At least that's how I started. And what I did last year was I took the outcomes on my syllabus. There are some outcomes on the syllabus I gave you. I took the first step towards creating a student knowledge survey. I took every objective and outcome and translated it to a task. And I'll show you an example in just a second. After I had those tasks, I made the exams, the assessments, and then from those assessments, after I wrote the exams essentially, then I developed what I was going to do in the class. You teach to the test. That's backward design, right? you know what the assessment's going to be, you know what you want the students to do, then you teach them how to do it. Then I aligned my letter grades to Bloom's, which I'll describe briefly. And then last, you just have to take those exams that you've written and make sure that you've distributed point values evenly across all of Bloom's levels. So you got, and I'll show you a graphic of that in just a second. You've got that in your hands essentially already. So with backward design, I used a student knowledge survey, and that's what you did is that Socratic introductory process, the quiz you just took. You were taking a knowledge survey for me. That was a knowledge survey that has everything to do with the learning outcomes of this class. Apply your understanding of course concepts to align your assessments and grades to incorporate a student knowledge survey. So I wrote a bunch of tasks, and that was the introductory quiz you took in Socratic. I've given you in this packet next my knowledge survey that I actually gave my genetics students. It may not be relevant to you, but you see now the format of this. You're not asking the students, you're not giving them specific questions. So you're not actually telling them what the final exam is going to be, the real questions. You're asking them to self-assess, do you think you could answer that question? Do you totally understand it? Do you somewhat understand it? Do you have no idea what I'm talking about? And the goal is to move students at the start of class, at the start of the semester or quarter, from I don't know what the hell you're talking about, what's deoxyribonucleic acid, to yeah, I think I can answer that question. So that's the student knowledge survey. And that's a good start for transforming how you letter grade students.
Are these each of your lesson objectives then?
Those become lesson objectives. So it's more granular. I start with course objectives, and then I break those down into every day now we have objectives. So I can show those to the students, I can say this is what we're going to do today. And so for example, one of my goals originally was this horrible goal, appreciate, I should never use that word. How simple statistical tests are used in genetics. The outcome is to be able to test hypotheses using statistics.
I don't want to go talk.
We have a disagreement in the corner.
Uh-oh.
Wanted a counter-argument to your privilege.
I think the word appreciate is perfectly all right.
Well, it's hard, that's totally fine. It's hard to assess, but
I disagree with that too.
so my redesign, then my outcome I changed a little bit, but I'm wondering, what will the skill, apply simple statistical tests to the analysis of data? What would the skill be for a knowledge survey? So I need to come up with a more concrete skill. So this is what would show up on what I give the students the first day of class. I give them the long list. That's what you got in that packet, the 2 or 4 page student knowledge survey. Can you evaluate pedigree data using a chi-square test? So it's a little bit specific. It talks about specific statistical tests and specific types of data. And the students are going to ask themselves, could I do that or not? So here's an actual assessment item from the actual exam. There's a pedigree. I ask them to write down the list of all of the different possible inheritance patterns it could be and then eliminate as many as they can based on statistical arguments. Where does that fall on Bloom's taxonomy? High up, low down? Apply, analyze, evaluate. So it's not top, it's not create. It's not just recall. So it's somewhere in the middle. Okay. So I won't go through this slide in incredible detail. There are a lot of reasons to use student knowledge surveys. There's some potential benefits. This one's the most argumentative, whether or not you can use student self-reflection to get summative information. That is, I wouldn't base letter grades on students' self-reflection on whether or not they think they learned. But that's an argument that can be had. And the potential benefits, though, nothing else. Use these knowledge surveys. These students get the course outline on day 1. They know kind of what the final exam is going to look like if you give a final exam, because they have the list of all the tasks they should be able to do by the time they're done with the course. So you've given them the outline and the study guide, so if you have students that are always asking you for a study guide, say you had it on day one. It was a knowledge survey. It sets expectations, and it also maybe helps the mindset shift, so that you know what's being expected of you, and that enhanced ability to navigate the system can be beneficial to some. Okay. So past that knowledge survey, way past it. You get this rainbowy graphic. So this is the tool I actually use in my class to do this for myself. Because there are 6 levels of Bloom's taxonomy, and I'm trying to stick with the totally arbitrary 5 letter grades, I decided to collapse, create, and evaluate together into A. So if you can do either of those things, you're earning an A in my class. And so to cut things to the chase, this is the letter grade rubric now. So when you flip past this chart to the final version of the syllabus, which is at the end of the packet, you'll see that I've added in, this is what you have to do to earn each letter grade. It's just the Bloom's verbs. You say if you can criticize, defend, interpret, justify, recommend, if you can do those sorts of things, that's what it takes by the end of this quarter or term to earn an A. If all you can, and I tell this to my students, if all you can do is factual recall, you're going to get an F. I expect these things. And you might also have noticed that I actually made the letter grade stand for something. It's another sort of mindset shift. That you're not failing. This is important. Students have told me this, that they feel like knowing that they just have foundational knowledge, it's better than failing. It's a more accurate representation of what you need. So your foundational knowledge, you've got developing knowledge, you're competent, your knowledge is burgeoning. If you can come up with a better B, that would be good. Or you're accomplished. It took me a while to come up with that B. So here, and I believe you have this one as well in the packet, is for this exam. I went through every question. I've got the task. I've rated which level of Bloom's I think it falls into, and I'm done. And all I did then at the bottom was make sure that I assigned numbers of points to each question so that they're an equal or almost equal number of points per Bloom's level. So exams, you do 20% of points for the bottom level for F students, 20% to get to D, and so forth. So your real task here is to make sure that you give roughly equal percentages of points available for the 5 different Bloom's levels. Here, I failed a little bit. I've got 20% of points available for the remembering in this exam. I a little bit overshot level 2 and level 3 with 30% each, and that only left me 20 total percent to get levels 4 and 5 and 6. So I was not as able to discriminate A's and B's from C's, D's, and F's. And that's sort of reflected in the percent of students that earned each of those letter grades on the actual exam. I had 42% of students earn B's. Right? So I'm not able to, presumably some of them might have been A students if I had had a few more point available to discriminate from A's and B's, or maybe from B's and C's. So when we look in the redesigned syllabus in the packet, what changed? Well, we've got a letter grade rubric, and what that does is tell students exactly what's expected of them in the class, and it makes it seem like there's no more bell curve. It seems like each letter grade is perhaps more accessible, that not just 10% of the points is reserved for demonstrating that you're an A student. We've expanded the dynamic range of point percentages that we can use to discriminate A's from B's, B's from C's, and so on. I should hasten to point out that this sort of approach applies to all disciplines because we're using Bloom's taxonomy, and here, for example, is a list of the Bloom's verbs. And so hopefully, regardless of what discipline you're in, you can see that despite the fact that all of my examples were couched in genetics, that you could use any of these verbs to represent tasks that you would ask your students to do in your discipline. Now, one of the sheets in the packet is a worksheet, and it leads you through this process of picking one of your learning outcomes, turning it into a task, aligning it with Bloom's taxonomy. And ultimately, you would do this for all of your examinations to create tasks that are turned then into exam items, assessment items or exam questions that you would pose to your students. And remember, the critical part is to give that student knowledge survey at the start and at the end of the semester. The start is really critical because that's when students get the idea of, here's a study guide, here are the tasks the instructor is asking us to perform throughout the semester. And once you have that student knowledge survey, that makes it really easy for the instructor to write the test. So that's another benefit to the instructor of doing this, is it enhances our ability to write tests because we already have a list of all of the tasks. So when it comes time to write that midterm, you look at the content that's been covered, you look at the associated tasks, and you already have the tasks that you've asked the students to be able to do. You just have to fill in the task with details to create a question that you would test them with. So benefits for students. As I've been mentioning over and over again, it's expectation setting and being transparent and letting the students know at the start of the semester what you expect of them and what they need to do to earn letter grades. For we faculty members, there are some fantastic benefits, although they're minimal, but one is it eliminates the number of questions that I get asking not only what's going to be on the test, but can you give us a study guide? The student knowledge survey is the study guide. Also, one of the things that's another nice ancillary benefit is that because there's an explicit expectation and description of what A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's mean, when I write student recommendation letters, I don't just say the student got a B in my class and hope that the person reading the letter understands what it means to get a B in my class, which out of context is meaningless. Now I can say, the student was able to perform these sorts of Bloom's level tasks to earn the B. And that may be a little bit more meaningful to the person that's receiving the recommendation letter. Finally, here are some useful references for talking about backward design of class, that is, starting with the outcomes, then deciding what your assessment items are going to be, and then deciding what you need to teach to get the students to be able to conduct those tasks. A great book on student mindsets, great reference for student knowledge surveys, and also how mindset changes can drive performance gains. So thanks very much for attending today, and I'll look forward to taking questions.